Genesis is big on family, and not just family like Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Jacob, not just that kind of family, but it starts talking about family even with the heavens and the earth, have a genealogy. Some translations don't use that language, but that's what Genesis calls it, a genealogy. And so this idea that our family is not even limited to humans, and that the community that we're in is not just the people in our household, the people in our congregation, the people in our denomination, but our community is really huge and expansive. And right now, while we're dealing with this pandemic, we really experience just how interconnected we are.
Welcome to Great Bible Teacher Interviews. Hello, I'm Rick Jordan. I'm president of Great Bible Teachers. Each week I have the opportunity to interview a scholar, an author, or a practitioner. We talk about the Bible, biblical interpretation, or spiritual formation. This week I'm very happy to have had the interview with Dr. Amanda Mbuvi. She is an assistant professor of religion at High Point University in High Point, North Carolina. She has her BA from Bryn Mawr College, her MTS from Palmer Theological Seminary, and her PhD from Duke. She is also the author of a book just published by Baylor University Press titled Belonging in Genesis, Biblical Israel and the Politics of Identity. I know you'll enjoy this interview as much as I did. Here is Dr. Mbuvi. Oh, and I meant to mention, we always begin our interviews with a discussion about the greatest Bible teacher in this person's life. But I wanted to include in this interview just a snippet of what Dr. Mbuvi talks about, what it's like to be in the college classroom now compared to not too many years ago. So we begin there with kind of our pre-interview, getting to know one another. And now, Dr. Mbuvi.
And I think it's really great that you have this ministry, because I think it's very much needed.
Thank you.
Because I'm really seeing a difference with college students now versus years ago. Just the committed Christians, their comfort level with the Bible has really been going down.
How do you mean, like their comfort level with the Bible? Like their knowledge of, or?
Yes. I mean, I used to, teaching Hebrew Bible, Old Testament, I'm used to people wrestling with kind of what does the Old Testament mean for Christians, and kind of working through that in some ways. But now I'm seeing a lot of students who don't even understand that the Old Testament is not the New Testament. I had a student once refer to the burning bush as when Moses got the call to follow Christ. And it's like, does that act? And it was an open book test, and it's like, it does not actually say that, the conversation with Peter, this is different, but they don't even see the difference between those two things. It's almost like they've heard one sermon, and so every Bible passage must be saying that.
Wow. Yeah. And I think that's true in some churches too. That is what they are nurtured on. Dr. Mbuvi, thank you so much for joining us at Great Bible Teachers. I'm delighted to meet you.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to have this conversation with you.
Thank you. The first question I always ask our interviewees, it has to do with their own spiritual journey, and who has been a great Bible teacher in your life, someone who has shaped you?
That's a hard question, because there have been so many, and because my professional work is to study the Bible. So I've studied with a lot of really great teachers, and they've taught me a lot of great things. But what I'll say for this, I'll say the students I was with in college, the people who led small group studies when I was in college, are some of the ones I value the most, because it felt like we really went deep together. We shared our lives in a deep way. We were deeply in the scriptures together, and it felt like we were doing some really substantial growth work together and journeying together in a way that I learned later was a little bit rare.
Yeah. Oh. So that that idea of community ties into a lot of what your research and writing has done, actually. And I do want to get into that, but first I want to also let our viewers know a little bit about your spiritual pilgrimage and background, because it's fairly unique as well.
Sure. So the short version that I give people is to say that I grew up Jewish in the Black church, which of course raises more questions than it answers, and that's fine because that it invites people to a longer conversation about that. What that means for me specifically is that part of my family is Jewish. I grew up in the Black church. With a strong understanding of being part of the Jewish people. That's always been something really central to my identity. And so I remember things like being in Sunday school class and they would be teaching about Jews and Gentiles, and the teacher was saying, we're all Gentiles except Amanda. And so it's just always been part of who I am. And as I've gotten older, I've learned to kind of reflect on that more and kind of make sense of it in some different ways. But I'm really grateful to have both of those rich heritages to draw on.
Yes, yes. What types of things do you have in your background that you bring to the scriptures that maybe are particular to you or to your identity as a Jew, your identity in multi-ethnic community, as a woman? You know, you have a lot of different areas that probably inform scripture that for me as a white male, I might be oblivious to.
Sure. There are a lot of things I could share in relation to that. So some things from Jewish tradition, for example, some of the things that it contributes are a comfort with ambiguity and this idea that there are multiple ways of understanding a text, that are not always going to leave a study with a clear sense of this is what it means and this is how it fits into everything else and this is the answer. But sometimes there are things that may still feel a little unsettled. Sometimes there may be multiple good ways of understanding a text. And there may not be consensus, not even among the people studying in the same room, and that's a good thing, and that's something to be embraced, and that's something that that we can learn from and grow through. That is not a sign of failure, but that is something to appreciate.
Yeah.
Along those lines, I would also add the role of community in studying the Bible together. I like to show the college students sometimes there's a clip from the TV show The Big Bang Theory. And so the men are all at the Comic-Con, and so the women are trying to figure out why the men are so into these stories, and they decide, okay, we're going to read a comic book, see what it's all about. And so they get the comic books, they sit down, they read it, they put it down, and they all look up and they have the same reaction. Well, that was dumb. But then as they start talking about it, they discover they got really different things out of it. And then they start debating and they start arguing, and there's this whole other level they get to by discovering that they all came at it from different directions and that they all understood things in different ways. And I think that's also true of studying the scripture, that there are things that we don't necessarily see as an individual that we can see in a group when we start to see how people get different things out of the same biblical passage. Whether that's the people that we study with, or if the people that we study with see it as similarity, discovering that there are other people out there in the world who understand the same passage in a different way. I think that's a really powerful part of how God uses the scripture. The kind of work that is done in us when we start to realize in the space between us and our different ways of seeing and understanding.
So how does that work these days? Like in our country, where things are so polarized, there's almost like if you have ambiguity, you're not loyal to your party or to your your group or something. And then also the idea of we need to all have the same answer. There's not an appreciation of a variety. So how do you challenge that kind of thing that's going on in our culture today?
Well, I think actually Bible studies are one of the most important ways to challenge that, because I think the people involved in those kinds of communities, those studying communities, are on the front lines of doing something very different that's not what's usually happening in our culture. And that is what it means to form a community that's not just about drawing sharp boundaries of us and them, and not always just about analyzing a situation, but actually thinking about how people grow, how people develop, and how society and communities transform. So it's not just this is the answer, but kind of who are we, kind of embracing vulnerability, and also thinking about how people learn, how people develop as individuals, but also as communities together that can have these kinds of tensions and things in them. Um, I think we get so focused on these kind of spaces of being right, that it's really important to think about people as works in progress, and to think about how we are developing and how we are developing together, and what God is bringing forth through us.
Mhm.
And I think this idea of being in a group of people studying the scripture, and really not with a sense of like, I have the answers and I want to hear about why I'm right and why I'm better than all those other people who don't see it this way. Um, but really being vulnerable and open to what God is doing in them, and recognizing that what it means to kind of sit around the scripture, and I'll say as Christians, what it means to be part of the body of Christ, which is this community that stretches all across the world and all throughout, throughout long periods of time. What does it mean to be connected to other people in that way? Who have a very different experience of the world and a different way of seeing the world. What does it mean to be joined to them as one body, and to really live into that? Um,
Mhm. Yeah. I want to go back to the idea of the different opinions and the comfort level that you feel that you have with that. Um, and I know not enough about this, but I know that there are uh, things in the Jewish writings that like the midrash type of things where um, there are scholars debating with scholars about things in some of the writings in the history of Jewish writing that we might be surprised to know that there's that kind of conversation or dialogue going on. Um, can you give us a little bit more about that, about what that ambiguity is and why there is that comfort level?
Sure. So there are a couple of different kinds of things there. So one of the first examples that I'm thinking of is in a lot of Jewish literature. It's a conversation. It's sort of layers and layers of conversation. And the core layer is the Torah, in the sense of the first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Um, so that's the core. Then there's this kind of next layer, the rest of what Christians call the Old Testament. And then there's the Mishnah and the Talmud, and it kind of extends out. And as people are talking about that and sort of joining this conversation with each other about that. And so in some conversations, it'll say, this rabbi says this rabbi says something different, next topic. It doesn't say who was right. It doesn't sort of take a side. It doesn't resolve it. It just will present multiple points of view and then carry on. And even in times when there are signs that one point of view is preferred, the other point of view is still there, and it still has value. It's not a sense of like, and this is why we must learn that this is heresy that we must suppress wherever we find it, but that it's still important to think about this other idea, and that's why it's being preserved and presented, and why the debate is part of what's passed on and not just the outcome.
Mhm.
Um, so that's a big part of where how that comes into play.
It's kind of interesting. I write curriculum also, and um, I had someone who no longer was going to use my curriculum because I quoted from someone that they disagreed with. And, they wrote and said, why would you even quote from that person? Uh, and and that's what this reminds me of a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
that maybe it's okay to have different voices in the room.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think it's not just okay. I think it's essential, because we all have blind spots and we all have things that it would never occur to us to question. And if we don't have people in our lives who can call us on those blind spots, we'll just stay in them. And not only will we stay in them, but we will start to claim that they are of God. And so it's really important to have people who kind of bring that different perspective, who can challenge us, who can see things that we don't see, and help us learn things that we didn't know, because we can't get there on our own.
Mm. So as a teacher yourself, how do you develop this sense of security that people can have different points of view? Like how do you nurture that?
That's a great question. So I would say right now I'm teaching undergraduates, and so undergraduates are coming at it with all different kinds of relationships to the Bible that we're studying. So some people are coming as Christians and different kinds of Christians, Catholics, Protestants, different kinds, also Jews, also people who aren't religious and don't really get why other people are. And so to me, that's one of the best things we have going for us in that kind of classroom, to bring so many different perspectives and different points of views. And I tell students that from the beginning. I tell them that, if they're coming in and they're scared because they've never really read the Bible before, that they shouldn't be, that's great, that can even be an advantage sometimes, because they'll ask the question that no one else will ask. I had a friend who went to church for the first time, and afterwards she was very confused, and she said, "Why was everybody singing about a sheep? What's with the sheep?" Like, she was baffled by this, and so all these, kind of language and kind of inside images that people don't know, to have someone who's actually going to ask that. Because the truth is, sometimes a lot of the insiders don't know either, but they don't think to ask. They're just used to it. So it's good to have people who can and ask those questions and things like that. I want people to be able to grow spiritually in my classes, if that's what they're looking for, and to kind of help them do that in their own ways. And I think learning from people with different perspectives and other traditions is an important way to do that, because it pushes them to take stock of what they believe and why and where it comes from and what other ways of understanding there are. And that's a really valuable process. It's essential to spiritual maturity, to be able to look at things kind of beyond a narrow sort of one-sided view. I like to show students, to kind of help them with this a little bit, an image of baby food. And so, you think about, how is baby food different from what adults eat? So it's like, well, this one will be, say, like chicken and summer vegetables, but it's just puree. It's just one orange mush. And so a lot of people, that's how they're used to experiencing the Bible. It's just one orange mush. But adult food has different tastes and textures and all these kinds of nuances and different things that a baby can't handle, but that an adult can. And so part of the work they do in a college class is to learn to notice those different tastes and textures and things like that, and to kind of to be aware of those things in a different way, and to encourage them that they can handle it, that it's okay, that God is big enough to handle their questions, and they're working through things on a different level, and that is a good process for them to be going through. And it's not in any way belittling what came before, but that at different stages in our life and in our path, we're ready for different things.
Wow, I love that illustration. That is awesome.
Thanks.
Even the scriptures have opportunity for dialogue and conversation in them, where I'm thinking about, like, Proverbs. Proverbs is very black and white. And then you get Ecclesiastes, and Ecclesiastes is kind of a dialogue with Proverbs, saying, well, maybe things aren't so black and white. Just because you've done the right things doesn't mean always that you're going to be rewarded. And if you've done the wrong things, you're always going to be punished. There are things in the Bible that, even like, and I'm thinking about, a Moabite. Moabites are not to be included in anything with the Jews. And then along comes Ruth. And so you have what happened here? We had a scripture in Deuteronomy, I believe, that says, you're not supposed to affiliate with these people. And then we have Ruth, who ends up being in the lineage of Jesus. So even the Bible itself has these opportunities for dialogue, it seems.
Yes, exactly. That it's already, and especially if we realize that the Bible did not fall from the sky in English, it's already in conversation with itself. So the different parts of it were written at different times, and it's already kind of preserving different takes, whether it's that people disagree or that in some circumstances people lean one way, and in a different set of circumstances people move towards something else. Um, but that's already very much a part of the biblical text itself, and that the biblical authors are much more comfortable with that than American readers tend to be. That it's sort of our hang up to kind of want everything to agree and be to line up and sort of be one straightforward statement. But the biblical authors weren't really thinking about things that way.
Mm-hmm. You've recently published a book that is on Genesis and community. Can you tell us a little bit about your insights that you're sharing in that book?
Sure. So one of the big things that I want to invite people to do in that book is to rethink who we are when we come to the text and what is happening in us when we're reading the biblical text. So especially now, especially in this culture, we're trained to believe that there are certain things about who we are that are just given by our birth. Um, Things like our race and our social identity, we're just sort of born into that, and that's what we are. And whatever God does, God sort of does on top of that. But what I want to invite people into is to think about the biblical text and what God is doing, especially what's happening in Genesis, is that God is actually digging down to the very foundations of who we are and inviting us to think about community and identity in different ways. That it's actually forming us as a community. It's not just we are what we are and then we do some other stuff, but we are becoming something else. So for example, if we think about the call of Abram, I'll call him Abraham for the sake of convenience. Name change is important, but we don't, it can confuse people. But if we think about the call of Abraham, God tells him to go and to leave his father's household, his land, everything that to define him. But he doesn't actually say what Abraham is supposed to become. God doesn't say what Abraham is supposed to become. It just says, go, I'll show you. Sort of go to TBA. And so for the whole rest of Genesis, that hasn't fully been fleshed out yet. It takes 3 chapters, the story of Noah's Ark. Flooding, destroying the world, building it again, repopulating it, 3 chapters. This Abraham project has barely started in the whole rest of the book of Genesis. And so why does Genesis spend so much time with Abraham in that kind of in-between place? Sort of, he's left behind what he was, but what he's becoming, he hasn't fully received or lived into or even fully understand. Meanwhile, he's interacting with all kinds of people who are sure they know who he is and who are defining him according to the categories that are familiar to them. So this struggle that we have living between identity of who we are in God and in God's work, and identity as kind of defined by people, that's not new to us. That's already in Genesis. And so Genesis can be a resource for us as we kind of navigate in this sense of saying, well, God didn't create race, it's not real, but it sure has a lot to do with the world that we live in. How do we live between those two things? How do we kind of work with both of those things, honor both of those things at the same time? Can we take race seriously without taking it for granted and as absolute? And Genesis can really guide us to notice those things. I think what Genesis is big on family, and not just family like Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Jacob, not just that kind of family, but it starts talking about family even with the heavens and the earth, have a genealogy. Some translations don't use that language, but that's what Genesis calls it, a genealogy. And so this idea that our family is not even limited to humans, and that the community that we're in is not just the people in our household, the people in our congregation, the people in our denomination, but our community is really huge and expansive. And right now, while we're dealing with this pandemic, we really experience just how interconnected we are and just how much our behavior ripples through all of these layers, and kind of it makes us aware of something that's been very deeply true all along.
Mm-hmm. So, so the idea of Genesis and genealogy is that we're connected with one another. We're also connected with the creation. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
with that, yeah.
Yes.
So, since you brought up genealogies,
Mm-hmm.
there are a lot of genealogies, and um, you know, if you're going to read through the Bible, that's one of the places where you probably kind of gloss over and say, yeah, this guy had this guy who had that guy. Um, but maybe we shouldn't. I don't know. What is your opinion about these genealogies? What is their purpose, and how can they be formative for us, or can they?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that question because I definitely think the genealogies need to get some more love. It's not a phone book in the Bible, and it's not like a commercial break to sort of go up before something important happens. That there's some really significant theological work happening in the genealogies, and there are different kinds of genealogies, and they have different purposes in the ancient world. Part of why it's hard for us to understand, I'll say, as Americans, is that we live in a culture that doesn't use genealogy as much as some other cultures. So my husband's from Kenya, and when he's at the village where his family's from, how he greets someone is dependent on how they're related to him. So already, just something like saying hello is already shaped by genealogy. So there are a lot of societies, present and past, where genealogy plays a really significant role in social organization and kind of how people understand how they're connected to each other. So if you imagine like meeting someone, you've never met them before, never met this person, and someone says, and this is your cousin, already, even for us, that sort of shifts things a little bit in our mind of kind of how we meet that person versus how we meet someone else. And what Genesis does that's so profound is it takes this idea of genealogy as something that describes our most basic kind of social connection and obligation and identity, and it extends that infinitely. Because it includes the cosmos in our genealogy, because it includes all humanity in our genealogy, that genealogy is kind of how Genesis expresses that we are part of all creation and that we're all connected to each other. So I think it definitely is worth thinking about theologically.
And sometimes there are little tidbits in them that I'm thinking about the genealogy of Abram
Mm-hmm.
himself. You know, so you have this genealogy, and then you have almost like it's an aside, but it's so profound that, and Sarah was barren. You
Mm-hmm.
know, it's like there's the setup for the story, and I say that because I've just been reading that area of the Bible and preparing a series of lessons on Abraham and Sarah, and thought, well, let's go back a little bit further and see what else we have. And the genealogy was there. It's like, well, I probably don't have to read that, but yeah, it was interesting that I mean, it just made me sad. You know, I got
Mm-hmm.
reading this person, this person, this person, and then boom, it's like, wow, this is like the end of the genealogy, maybe. Is
Mm-hmm.
what he was saying.
Exactly. Yes, and that's one of the things I especially want to encourage study leaders to think about is a lot of times the things about especially the Old Testament that seem the most boring. Um, those are the things that we need to read in the most detailed way, because when it just seems repetitive and it's saying the same thing over and over again, it's usually not exactly the same. And those little differences, those little nuances carry a lot of meaning. So it's worth to kind of sit down and notice if there's a pattern and then all of a sudden something breaks the pattern. Well, why did it break the pattern? What is happening? What's different about this? If this is something's repeated, is this, what word is changed, what order is changed, what extra little comment is made, and what is happening there and what's being done with that.
Mm. Because that's intentional. Uh, um, the writer has done that intentionally.
Yes, and the word in Hebrew for reading, when people talk about reading in the ancient world, it was not what reading means to us, where we sit down and open a book and look at it. Reading is reading out loud. So most of the first recipients of biblical text, the first audience, were hearing it out loud. And so repetition and all these things help when you're listening to a story, kind of help focus someone's mind on something, help people notice the detail. There's not going to be a clue that sort of says, talk slowly, to give the reading equivalent of like slow motion in a movie. But sometimes the repetition or a change in how much detail you're given accomplishes that in a text. So if you think about children's books, which are the books that in our culture we're most often reading out loud, and some of the strategies of kind of storytelling, to notice how many of them are in the Bible too, because it helps people listen to a story and follow along.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I thank you for your time and your insights that you've shared with me. I wonder, I always ask, or often ask anyway, what have I not asked that I should have asked you that you could share with us?
Ooh, great question. I think in some ways this relates to your previous question about my background and kind of what it means to bring to the Bible. But I think the other question is, what is the value of reading the Bible in Hebrew? One of the things about being in Jewish community is that the Bible is read in Hebrew, and people have different levels of understanding, and people are often following along in translation in a book. But I think there's something really profound even about just listening to the text in Hebrew. I like to assign students, especially in the 5 Books of Moses class, a textbook that has Hebrew in it. I know none of them can read it, but just to be reminded on every page that it's there. Because it's really hard to get out of this mindset that the Bible fell out of the sky in English. And there's so much that we've done to domesticate the Bible and to make it fit in as part of our culture. And so just having it, I mean, besides the kind of levels of nuances you see when you can study the Hebrew, just remembering that it wasn't made by people like us is so huge for appreciating it as a reader, to sort of realize that this is something bigger than our society and sort of bigger than us. I think being mindful of that is very, very valuable.
Wow, that's a great idea. I'm reminded of, I was a pastor, and one time I did a study of Psalms, and I think it's 11 and 12, the Psalms, but it had the acrostic, which in the English you didn't see because it wasn't intentionally done in English. And also you had a chapter break, so I remember, so what I did with that was I got my copy of my Hebrew Bible and copied it and showed, how the alphabet ran through both of those Psalms, and that was something. I mean, it's a little thing, but it is something that says this wasn't written in English, and why it was divided, I don't know, but it was divided there for some reason at Mem and Noon or something. It's like that there was a division there, and for those people, they were like, well, we didn't know anything about this. And then somebody saw, footnotes at the bottom. It's like, what are all these footnotes about? It's like, well, because some of these words we don't really know, like scholars take their best guess of what this meant, but it's not, it is an educated guess, what we know right now.
Exactly. And I think that's really helpful for us, even spiritually. I mean, besides how we understand the Bible, but just how we understand ourselves and what it means to sort of not have yourself at the center of everything. To just sort of live with, and there's stuff I don't know, and there's stuff that it's a inside joke I'm not going to get.
I'd like to thank Dr. Mbuvi for her expertise and her time that she has given with us today. A couple of takeaways for me. One is the importance of realizing our blind spots, and therefore the importance of having other voices in our studies and in our classrooms, so that we can hear and see things we would not have otherwise. Another takeaway for me has to do with the challenge to be challenging, to not be satisfied with the orange mush that babies consume when we are dealing with adults. that there are these tastes and textures that come, and we're mature enough to handle these now, hopefully. And if not, you can build them up to be able to handle these things that are a little bit more challenging for us as adults in Christian education. And finally, the idea of genealogy and how important those are, how it's tempting to skip over them, to see them as the boring parts. But Dr. Mbuvi says that the boring parts are sometimes very meaningful. And so we need to pay attention to them as well. Do you have any comments about what was most important to you or questions that you might have? Please put them in the comments box below. If you want to know more about interviews that I do, you can sign up for the enews at greatbibleteachers.com. Every Tuesday, I publish a blog, and every Thursday, I publish an interview. So you'll be informed about those events if you'll sign up for the enews. Thank you again for joining today.